Welcome to another brisk, cold Utah day. Can't see it too well, but it's snowy and it's like 28 degrees right now. So I've gotten a lot of questions over the years since I did this swap of the rear end of my vehicle, and honestly I didn't take a lot of documentation of the rear because the swap was always intended to be, you know, adjustable for what you wanted it to be. So you build your rear height to where you want it, and then the swap's adjustable on the front end to match the rear. But still, a lot of people want to see what I did. So I guess today I'll go through it and show you. So what we've got here, they're dirty, but you see they are just silver springs. They're from Rough Country. They're the Rough Country 6-inch lift springs. I'll put the part number for those. I have to go look it up. They're not too expensive to buy direct from Rough Country outside of their kit. And they don't actually net 6 inches of lift. They actually only net 3.5 inches of lift. They call it a 6-inch lift kit because they're factoring that the front will raise up with the torsion crank 2.5 inches, and then you get 3.5 of lift. So this really only rides 3.5 inches higher than stock, to be honest. So that's that thing I talked about in my other video about how lift kits and lift numbers, inches, is just subjective and doesn't actually mean anything. So called a 6-inch lift spring, really only a 3.5-inch lift spring. Now, why that's important is I did what I tell everybody to do, which is to, sorry, you hear the aircraft flying over right by a military base. I was hoping on a cold day they wouldn't be doing as much, but looks like they are. What I did was the same thing that I tell everybody to do, which is to set up the rear first and then level the front to it. And that's what I did here, where I compress the front of the vehicle on the springs to see how much the springs will compress under the weight of the front of the vehicle, so that I knew how high to set the coil mounts on the frame. Well, as you guys all know from watching the videos, this first swap I used factory Dodge coil mounts, which was a nightmare. They're not level on the back, they're slanted, they're notched, and the way they're built is that the only way I could even really use them on the frame, I needed to buy, you know, $120 worth of coil spring spacers to even get the springs to sit right under the front of the vehicle to match the height on the rear. So that's why one of the first things I made was the Tahoverlanding coil mounts, so that you could, you know, have adjustability and have an easy to install, you know, coil mount on your frame. Not even to mention how hard it is to actually get those coil mounts off of the Dodge frame that are welded on, because most people are going to have to go to a U-pull at junkyard, and there is an across the country rule that U-pull at junkyards, you can't have any kind of grinder or anything that will shoot sparks. So what you have to do is use a Sawzall. And so, like what I did, I had to go and cut the entire frame out from underneath the truck to get a section of frame out and buy that section of frame, which I think cost me $50 or $60 at the, you know, at the checkout at the U-pull at junkyard. And then I had to take it home, start grinding and cutting welds and extracting it, and then, you know, start mounting those to the frame. But since they're sloped on the back, I had to kind of prop it up and make it the right angle, and then fill in the back because there was quite a bit of gap up the top. So anyway, that's for another video. But point is I did the rear first using these springs, these 3.5-inch lift, but called 6-inch lift springs. Now, I definitely needed longer shocks. My shocks were so short that they were limiting the travel substantially. If you look right here, this is what happened when I had the springs in and I was just unbolting the shock. You can see how much the axle drops as soon as the shock gets unbolted. So then what I did is I measured for rear shocks. And this actually comes up a lot, is measuring for shocks. I don't understand how this isn't taught more often, but I'm going to cover it today. So what I did is I drooped out, I had the suspension hanging drooped, and then I measured from shock mounting bolt to shock mounting bolt. You know, I measured from here to there and determined the amount of length that was the fully drooped out length. And then I added an inch to that length. And I wrote that down as my minimum extended length number. Then, as you guys know, I have my axle jack. I took the springs out and I jacked the axle all the way up. And I measured again, bolt to bolt, and I subtracted an inch from that and I wrote that down as my maximum compressed length, so that at any given time my shock is not actually maxed out. So at full compression it's not maxed out, and at full droop it's not maxed out. Now what that means is that you need to have limit straps. Now I'm gonna sheepishly admit that I didn't actually purchase limit straps for the rear of this, even though I should have. But here's proof. The whole spring moves around, it'll slip out all the time, and then it reseats. I like to wheel, and I don't want to spend too much time wrenching. I think that wrenching too much takes away from wheeling, so I think you should wrench the minimum and wheel the maximum, and I probably should do limit straps, and I will. And you can hear it every time that gets unseated, and you hit a bump, and you can kind of hear it and then slip back in. So also with the lift, the track bar, or some people call it a pannered bar. Now the Rough Country lift kit comes with a bracket that bolts in right here, and then just raises this up 3.5 inches, and then it attaches here. Now that's one way of doing it, and to be honest, it's not a bad way of doing it, because it makes the angle of the track bar more horizontal. But I wasn't even sure that I wanted to go that route. I knew that I was going to probably want an adjustable track bar either way, so I just went straight to an adjustable track bar, which is a simple build. You can see that this is just two 7/8 inch heim joints, left hand and a right hand, with the threaded inserts welded into some tubing. And then these are just a 2-inch wide joint, so I think that's a super standard joint you can buy anywhere. And then it's a 14mm bolt that they use, so a 9/16 joint works fine. You'll see that I've actually added chromoly weld washers on the bolts. I always do that, but what that allows me to do is allows me to have some fine-tune adjustment, and that's important because I'll show you that in a little bit. Now also, as part of the Rough Country kit, they just have a bracket that moves the brake line up. Now it seems kind of hack or slacker to me to do that, but again, I was just in a hurry to wheel, so rather than buy their bracket, that's just a piece of bent angle or bent flat stuff that I just drilled a hole in and bolted right there. And it's worked for what's going on nearly 3 years now. So do what's going to get you on the trail fastest. Okay, that's all I've done. Now you can see at full droop my vent line is a little stretched, but it still stays on, so I haven't even bothered to stretch that out or lengthen that yet. So the shocks are longer, and you'll see that shocks are hard to find sometimes when you're looking for them in a length. So you need to go around and start hunting around for the right kind of shock. Now these shocks didn't have the right bolt size I needed down here, so I had to buy these shocks, but then I had to buy separate sleeves for the rubber bushings for the bolts that were the right size. So you may need to do that. You got to get kind of creative, because these shocks are not necessarily made for a 2001 Chevy Tahoe. I found shocks that were an eyelet to eyelet, eyelet to eyelet configuration, and then bought $6 worth of sleeves to put in the shock bushings to make it the correct diameter bolt, and that's worked great. What I've also found is that the rear bump stops, see, that's a factory bump stop. The Rough Country lift kit these springs come out of, if you read the instructions, it says that you need to drop the bump stops further down. And I'll tell you why that is because the shocks max out, and the shocks are what limit you. My configuration on the rear has factory bump stop height, and I tuck these 35s all the way up. They go all the way. So I think that that's why I also didn't want to go with their kit. Lift kits are made to be easily installed and an easily sellable part to the general public. And you need to, maybe put a little extra time and care into your shocks and a few other things, and you don't need to sacrifice the performance. Because honestly, a lift kit is to make your vehicle higher and look cooler on the pavement. That's what a lift kit usually does. So you need to take a little bit of your own, your own logic in and spend a little bit of time focusing on some other parts to improve where the lift kit falls short. Oh, the sway bar. Yes. So you might notice I have no sway bar. I mean, it's gone because I took it off. The sway bar limited me, and this is almost exclusively a trail rig, so I don't really care about the sway bar. And it is a little wallowy on the street, I'll admit, but it doesn't bother me enough that I want to put one on. And people that have done this swap, that leave their factory sway bars, just disconnect one link. Like when I went off-roading with Tahoverlanding Axle Swap customer Eric Rankins down in Moab, all he did was just pop one link off, and we wheeled in Moab with it that way. So, what was it, 3 minutes worth of work, and he was good to go. But I've just taken it off. So it's gone. Just took it out completely. And I don't mind at all. I think it works really great. Man, I really probably should put some limit straps on it. As much as I tell people they need limit straps, it makes me kind of a hypocrite to not have them on the rear of this. But I forget about the rear. This is, for the most part, so problem-free that I forget about it. So there's that brake extension there. Obviously, the better thing to do is get an extended brake line, but at the time, I just wasn't in the mood to get a new brake line and bleed brakes and everything else. So, and that's been like that for years. You can see right here, let's get a better shot of it. This is the wire coming out of my differential for my Eaton E-locker. Huge fan of the E-locker, very problem-free, very easy installation. You don't have to run lines and stuff. It's literally just a wire. And you don't have air leaks and have to worry about all that stuff. They're not like ARB air lockers that if the diff fluid is too dirty, the locker will fail. And they're not like air lockers where you have to have, you know, line that goes all the way up that cracks and splits and leaks, and then you don't have a locker function. So I recommend the Eaton E-locker to anyone because they are very strong. They've actually improved their strength. They're on their I think on their 4th generation of them now, and they are quite strong. So actually, here's another problem that I had. With these 35-inch tires, I am running, so I get a better view of it here, 2-inch wheel spacers. And even with that, the way that the factory shock bolt configuration was, of the upper shock bolt on the passenger side, I had tire chafing issues. So this is the driver's side. As you can see, it's unchanged. And if you look, you got a big old nut and then stud sticking off, and that was chafing my tire because with a track bar like this or panhead bar like this, as the suspension goes up, this tire goes up and over. So what I ended up doing was going up and taking that bolt, flipping it around, so it's the excess threads and stud is hanging out the back now. I actually took a grinder and I softened the edges of it. But then you'll see that I shortened right here. This had a step to it that I went through and shortened. See this one, it's hard to see the dimension of it right here, but it's like the width of my finger. I actually cut this off here and pushed it flat. I then had one person tell me that just for symmetry, I should trim down and do the same on this other side. And I said, absolutely not. Because, as I mentioned, the axle is moving towards that side, which means the shock is, at the lower mount, is actually moving towards that way as well. So leaving this one further outboard will help with shock geometry. So it is actually more correct to have this one at the top mounted a little further out, and this one at the bottom mounted a little further in. There, I've lowered the lift down a little bit so you can see the pronounced difference. This is the passenger side that's been shortened. That's the driver's side that has not. So one of the largest things people ask me about on the rear is about moving this axle further back. To, you know, because I mean, I guess if you look right here, let's see, let's get a better shot. See how much closer to the front it is than it is the rear? And people think that they've got to somehow change their control arm length for that. Well, guess what? You want your axle to be centered at full compression. So wherever your axle is going to be, that puts this tire centered in this wheel arch, which is a limited wheel arch because it's not like a pickup truck. You can't just start hogging out and tubbing this because that's like a seat and there's a door here. But whichever position is going to have this centered at full compression is where you want your control arm length to be. So you want this to be completely centered in this wheel arch at full compression. And you want your control arm length to be such that it accomplishes that. And that is exactly what the factory control arm length does. And look, I can see that it, is more forward here at fully drooped position. And in your mind, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I need to fix that. But look in the mud. That tire has not scrubbed any of this, which means it's actually where it needs to be. Now, I haven't done any rear trimming, even a tiny bit on this. And I can see this one little piece of sheet metal. There was a lip bent over, must have got caught by the tire at some point. So I probably could have trimmed that or pounded that over. In fact, that was a fairly recent thing. I wonder if there was a rock there, because that's new. That's not a common thing for me. I wonder what, there must have been a rock trapped on top of the tire or something. But look, on this side, that tire hasn't touched anywhere. Now you can see in the mud where the axle has scraped this plastic, probably this shock bolt here, or this upper control arm bolt, sorry. Now on the passenger side is much the same story, except for right here where the rear heating and cooling lines are. See this little plastic piece? Now I actually removed this plastic piece, but I wanted to leave just this one piece here just as an extra protection for those. And you can see it's actually way out of position. It's folded way out like this because there's nothing holding it anymore. But that has scrubbed the tire, but not enough to, if it was pushed in, I mean, so that has touched, but look. Nothing. And you can see on this side, that same lip that was on the other side doesn't have anything peeled back. So I bet you there was some rock or branch that my tire picked up that must have just grabbed that and peeled that down. So I know it sounds counterintuitive, but don't go and change your rear axle location. It's, if anything, going to make it worse, not better. You have great clearance. These are 35 by 1250 R17s, and they tuck all the way up in and give me so much clearance that I can run a factory bump stop location on the rear axle. I've been so lazy that I haven't even taken the factory spare tire out from underneath it. That thing has probably gotten beaten and scraped. I mean, look at this. Look at all the red scrapes on it from Moab. Now, with it down on the ground, you can see the track bar isn't actually that far from horizontal. And the reason why I knew I needed an adjustable track bar anyway was that I wanted to be able to fine-tune the rear axle width, not because it'll be 100% perfectly centered under the vehicle at ride height, but just in case I had to fine-tune the clearance issues from, side to side for the maximum upward travel. That's the whole point of this swap, is low center of gravity. And you get low center of gravity from maximum upward travel. So if you sacrifice a hair of precision as far as your rear axle being out of center 1/8 of an inch one way or the other to maximize your upward travel, I say go ahead and do that. It's okay to sacrifice a little bit of precision for more performance. Don't sacrifice a lot of precision for a little performance, but a little precision sacrifice for lots of performance is definitely worth it.